Welcome. In this video, I'm going to cover Chapter 16, Securing and Sharing Windows Resources. Alright, so we're going to talk about how to secure our personal computers using some tools that are already existing on our local computer, how to share and secure files and folders on our networks, and then support network resources using Active Directory. So we have two goals when we try to secure anything, right? To protect our resources, but also not to interfere with the functions of the system. So there's always a trade-off. They're always in conflict, right? You don't want to secure something so securely that you can't use it, right? I always joked as a security analyst that the only secure server was one that we dug a 50-foot deep hole, threw it in, and filled it in with concrete. It was secure, but not very usable, right? So there's a trade-off on security and usability, and those will always be conflicting each other. So when we think of security, we have several things that we really want to worry about at first, right? So authentication and authorization are two of our big ones, right? So authentication is being able to prove or identify who somebody is on the network or on the computer, right? It's validating who you are, right? Like your user account, right? Your email address, things like that can be used as proving who you are, with your password, right? So, or your token or something, right? It proves that it's you. Then once we know who you are, we've authenticated who you are, then we look up what are you authorized to do, right? So then that determines what you can do on the system or the network. But after authentication, we need to verify it is you, and then we figure out what you're authorized to do, right? Right now, passwords are the most widely used way of authentication, and you should give the user the ability to change their passwords. There is an option to where you can set their password and they're not able to change it. It's not really a very functional option, but it is there. We should require strong passwords, right? Combination upper lowercase, 16 characters. Use a special character symbol, right? Try not to use consecutive letters or numbers, and do not use the same password for more than one system, ideally. All right, so we have group policy and local security policy. There's some editors, but there's group policy and a local group policy and local security policy editors. They both kind of do very similar things, right? So the group policy is with Active Directory. If you have Active Directory, you have a group policy that is able to be administered and pushed down to every server, workstation, on the domain, right? And so your domain could stretch across the world, and you could have it pushed out. And these are security policies for both the device and users, and that is group policy. Now each machine has a local group policy, and it contains a subset of group policies that only apply to that local computer or local user, and you can edit it with the tool GPEdit, right? Within the local group policy, there's a subset of policies called the security policies, local security policies, and you can access them with the sec pool editor, but you can also get it from GP Edit. So here, let's just pull up GP Edit, right? So edit the group policies. So here is my group policies on this virtual machine that I'm using. You have computer settings and user settings, and each one has software settings, Windows settings, and admin templates. So if we go under the Windows settings, right, there is the security settings, and there's the security settings. And if we expand the security settings, you'll see that you have account policies, so password policies, lockout policies, that you can configure on this machine. So let's look at the password policy, right? So you can enforce password history. So how many passwords are remembered, so that they can't use the same password. The maximum password age. So how often do they have to change their password? The minimum length, any complexity requirements. You can force that on this computer. Every user has to do that, or you can do it by user. Well, actually, yes, can't do that. There's very few user settings, but you have to do it by the computer setting. Count lockout, right? So lockout threshold, right? So how many invalid login attempts are there before you lock out the account? How long does it get locked for? And then reset account lockout counter, right after. So if we click on this, right, determines the number of minutes that must elapse after a failed login attempt before the failed login attempt counter is reset to 0 bad login attempts, right? So this is how many bad logins, right? So let's just put it at 5 bad logins, all right? Because the threshold was now 5, the settings for the following have changed. The account lockout duration is 30 minutes, or it should be 30 minutes, and then the reset account is 30 minutes. So we'll say okay. So what this says is after 5 bad logins, lock out the account for 30 minutes, and then every 30 minutes reset the bad login attempt to 0, right? So what that means is I could try to log in, and I could do 3 bad attempts. Then I can wait 30 minutes, and I could do 3 more. Actually, I could do 5 more after 30 minutes, because the counter would go to 0. But if I do 5 bad logins in any 30-minute period, then I'm locked out for 30 minutes, right? Or I could do, an hour. I could lock it out for an hour. But what I want to do is not set that. And then everything gets reset. All right. But so these are the security settings of the group policy. But I can do some scripts, some startup scripts or shutdown scripts that I can run on this machine. I can do log on and log off scripts for users. This is where you would most likely map network drives for a user. And you use a script for that. But so what I'd like to show you is, right, these are the local group policies. I'm in the local group policy editor, GP Edit. But if I go to SecPol, the local security policy editor, it'll pull up. And you'll notice that the security settings, they match because it's just a subset. The SecPol editor, SecPol editor, is just this subset of security policies within group policy. All right, so there's just two ways to access the same thing, right? So I can go back in here, right? I could put this to 5 attempts again. Say okay, say okay. Now I should be able to go back in here and, well, let's do a refresh. View. Why is it not refreshing? Should be able to refresh, but it's not refreshing. All right, so let's go back out and go GP edit. And Windows settings, security settings, account settings, account lockout. And so now it's refreshed. Good. All right, so now they both are identical, and I can administer one from the other, right? But apparently there's no refresh on this one. Say okay, okay. Yeah, there's no refresh for this. You have to close it and then come back in. That's unusual. Usually there's a refresh. Okay. So, but this is your policy editors, and like I said, you can do all kinds of things, software restriction policies, application controls, policies, app blocker, right? There's just so much that you can do with this. See, software policies, right? Well, it's not so much in the local. I'm used to using with the Active Directory, which there are a ton more features, and then you can get administrative templates, right? So, control printers, control server, right? Allow only system backups, right? Network templates, how it handles offline files, how you handle network connections, right? So I could prohibit configurations of network bridges. I can route all traffic through the internal network, prohibit use of firewalls, sharing, internet connection sharing, things like this. There's just endless amount of options that you can do with group policies. Local group policies, this is, like I said, this is just minimal. And Active Directory adds way more when you have a Active Directory enabled machine. All right. And then, of course, these are available with business and professional editions of Windows. You won't have this with Home, right? Home edition will not have these tools. All right. This just shows them. All right. Right. You can manage Credential Manager and Control Panel to manage web credentials. You can edit and delete usernames and passwords, right? Digital certificates, you can go ahead and play with that, but so control panel, then system security. Let's see here. Let's just look at credential manager. So manage web credentials, right? So here I have some web passwords, on here, and so then I can manage them. I can delete them, right? So I can remove them. Windows credentials, so here's all the Windows credentials and all their information, and you can manage them. You can add a certificate-based credential, right? Backup credentials, restore credentials, but so this is just where you can manage your web passwords for Windows. All right. And it is showing what you can do. All right, so in the UEFI firmware on the motherboard, you can have passwords, right? So when you power on, you can ask for a password. One, you can have it just when you're trying to require changes. If you're trying to edit the UEFI, you need a password before you can enter in to edit it. Or you can actually require a password to use the system or even view the UEFI. You can also have a drive lock password that you have to enter in to get access to the hard drive. And that's stored on the hard drive, so even if you pull the hard drive out and try to put it into another machine, it'll still require the password to access the drive. And this is just showing a version of a UEFI BIOS settings for the passwords. It'll differ by model and make of motherboard that you have. So Internet Options dialog box, right, can be used to secure our Internet Explorer, right? And Windows 10 comes with Explorer 11, but we also have Microsoft Edge that they hope to eventually replace Internet Explorer with. Right, let's see here, right, look for HTTPS for security. Yeah. Right, so here's the internet options. Right, so if we go and open up Internet Explorer, and go to Internet Options. Why are we not going? Okay. It's grayed out. Okay. Explorer, run as administrator. Now we have Internet Options. All right. So you can enable the home page, start with the home page, start with tabs from the last session. There's some security in here. You can determine the zones. You can add some trusted sites that have lower security. You can also put in some sites that you restrict and don't allow it to do much of anything. You handle some pop-up blockers, things like that, autocomplete settings, connections. So if you need to add a VPN or add other connections, right, you can do that, or a proxy server. If your company requires a proxy server, this is where you would set that up. You would check the box, and you would put the name or IP address of the proxy server and what port Depends on what port. It could be under 80 or 8080. And then you can have it bypass the proxy for local addresses. So anything on the same network, local network, it would bypass the proxy. But for anything on the internet, it would use the proxy. And then all of these settings can be configured by group policy from Active Directory. You can configure all of these policies. This just goes over the tabs, pop-up blockers, managing the add-ons for Explorer. All right. So in Windows, we can encrypt our files and folders. If files marked for encryption, every file created in or copied to the folder will be encrypted, and an encrypted file remains encrypted if moved to an unencrypted folder. So it's just very simple, right? We just open up a folder. Let's just create a new folder. We'll call it Inc. And then if we right click, go to properties, right? And then as it says here in the general tab, we got the advanced attributes button, and then we can encrypt the contents, right? And that's it. And you click OK, and then everything. And yeah, so now I just create a key. So it tells me that I should back up my encryption key. Otherwise, if I lose my key, I will lose access to all these files that are in this folder. But so now, anytime I create a file in here, it gets encrypted. So this is encrypted, right? So you see the lock on it that's encrypted, right? This is encrypted. All right, so now, even though I have complete access because I have a key, but if somebody were to gain access to the computer and it's not logged in as me, an administrator wouldn't be able to read this without getting the key because this is encrypted. All right. All right, and this shows us to encrypt it. Now, that's just encrypt just a certain folder or some files, but we have a BitLocker which can encrypt the entire drive, right? And there's 3 ways to use it. You can have computer authentication. If you have a trusted platform module on the motherboard, you can use it as computer authentication. So it will only unencrypt if it's logged into that motherboard, right? So if the hard drive is stolen, it won't allow access because they don't have the motherboard. Then you have user authentication, right? The startup key stored on a USB drive, so you have to have the USB drive plugged in. And then computer and user authorization is a PIN or password required every startup, right? So it's an example of multi-factor authentication, right? It's really just one factor, but yeah, at startup you have to type in your PIN or password to get the hard drive to start up, and then of course you have to log in as well. So I guess that's multi-factor, right? So you password to get the drive to start up, and then the user has to log in, and then the drive's fully unencrypted. comes with a price, right? So if the TPM chip fails and you're using that, then you risk losing everything, right? If you lose the USB, right, you can't log in. Make sure you make extra copies of the startup key and our password. Keep them in a safe location because that's the keys to your drive. And it's enabled through the BIOS, the UEFI is how you would enable it, the TPM chip, if you're using that, and then just in control panel, go to BitLocker Drive Encryption applet and use that. And this is just showing, turn on BitLocker, or right now it's off, and then you can just turn it on. I'm not even going to try to show that because I don't want that enabled on my device. All right, so typically we have a wireless router provided to us by our ISPs, and a lot of them also have firewalls installed with them. But also routers can do some basic firewall stuff, but then we actually have firewalls that on corporate networks that are devices that are capable of doing all kinds of security investigations and settings, and but there's also some software on Windows. Windows firewall, it's a software personal firewall that comes in installed. Let's see here. So we can go to firewall. All right, so right now my firewall is on for any domain networks, for any private networks, and any public networks. I can allow an app through the firewall. I can do different notification settings. I can restore firewalls to the default. So like here on my private network, I might want to turn that off, or I can block incoming connections. Let's see here. And then I could allow an app through the firewall. So this will actually bring up, all kinds of things like branch cache is a unique service that is allowed between Windows Server and clients. It saves bandwidth. But you can see that there's a lot of things already allowed through the private, and then fewer allowed through the public, right? But you can control any of these applications, and then you can change the settings, right? And once that goes, now I can allow another app, so I can go find the app that I want to allow. Say I downloaded something new, and I find it, click on it, and then I would add it, and then I would say, is it allowed on my private network, or my public network, or both, right? All right, that's the Windows firewall. But here is a typical setup. Here you have the internet, you have a firewall that's physical hardware. You might have a server that might have a software firewall, and then you have your switch, router, and then you can have personal firewalls on the internal machines. So you can have all kinds of firewalls available that are constantly trying to block the bad traffic. Okay, so typically in a company setting, you need users to be able to share files with others, and then you have printers that you want multiple users to use, and so you need to share folders, files, and printers, right? So then you need to assign permissions to the user accounts and to the folders, files, and printers, right? But we use what's called the principle of least privilege, and you only give somebody enough privilege and enough access to do their job and nothing more. Right, and then so are established when you first create a user, but and you're so we can use the user account applet in control panel, or by using local users and groups utility. If you got pro, you have to use that user account applet if you have home edition. But if you have pro or enterprise, you can use the local users and groups utility to create users, and we've done that. Then, of course, you have different types of accounts: the administrator account or a standard user account. Use the comp management tool to access local users and groups. This is showing that utility, right? And creating a new user, create the password. Can password be changed or must be changed at the next login? We have some built-in groups: the administrator and user groups, the guest group, and the power user group. These are groups by default, but you're probably going to want to create your own groups and assign access to the groups. Let's see. Right, so we also have some of these built-in groups. Authenticated users includes all users accounts except the guest account. Everyone includes all authenticated users plus the guest account, and anonymous users are even users who've not even been authenticated on a remote computer. So that's like everybody, right, that hasn't been authenticated. So you can assign and give access. So a lot of times you want to give anonymous users access to, like on a web server, you want to give them read access to the web pages, so that anonymous users that haven't logged in or haven't authenticated can access the web page. Otherwise, you would have to log in anytime you hit Google. If you use just the authenticated or everyone group or whatever, you'd have to be authenticated and you'd have to log in TC Google. So they would use this anonymous users if they were using a Windows web server, which they're probably not. But if it's a Windows web server, you would have to use the anonymous users and give them access to the web pages. Right. And it's always easier and best practice to assign permissions to groups instead of individuals, right? It's much easier because you can remove a user from a group or remove a user from all groups, and know that all their access is taken away if they only have access given to them by groups. But if you assign access to accounts, individual users, you would have no idea what 500 or 1,000 different folders or locations that you would need to go to remove their access. But it would be very easy if you only assign permissions to groups and then assign the people to the groups. It's easy to remove a user from the groups and then know that their access is gone. So it's always best practice to assign access to groups instead of individuals. Right, so if you're not in a domain, you have this work group sharing. It offers better than a home group. Um, so you have to be in the work group to access it, but you can control who has access to what folders. Where in home group is just a single password, and if somebody has the password, they get access to anything that's shared. So it's not as secure. Whereas work group, you can at least have some access restrictions on what you share. You can share stuff with Bob, and would share different things with Lisa. Um, uh, and then domain sharing gives you a much easier way of sharing, and groups and security settings, and it can all be managed in a central location, whereas the work group sharing and all the permissions have to happen at the resource. So if you got 10 servers and 1,000 folders, you have to go on each of the servers and manage each of the folders individually and create users on each of the servers. So if Bob needs access to all 10 servers, you need to create Bob on all 10 servers. Whereas in a domain, Bob gets created once in Active Directory, and then you just go onto the servers and then add Bob group. You put Bob in a group, and you put the group on the servers, but the account wouldn't have to be on the servers, and so you can administer what groups Bob was in from Active Directory, and so you can remove his access or give him access to any folder easily from a central location. It's much simpler to manage. Right. So individual user data, right? That's stored in the C user folder for each user. Every user, anytime you log into a machine, you get a folder with your username underneath the user's folder. Any data that you want to share with all users on a machine, you can just put it in the public folder, right? But it's better to create a folder outside of this and assign permissions to that folder in subdirectories. So what I would do is create a folder and a group, and then assign at least one group, if not 2 groups if you need admin level and non-admin level, right? So typically you would create 2 groups for each folder that you create and share, one with read access and one with read-write access, right? Change access, the ability to change, and then once you have the groups, then you just put whoever you need in those groups to get access to that folder. So share permissions, grant permissions only to network users, not to local users, right? And NTFS permissions apply to the local users and network users, right? So if you're accessing a folder over the network, both share permissions and NTFS permissions apply. If you're only accessing the folder locally, then only NTFS permissions apply. Right. So if it's a network user, so both the share and NTFS permissions apply, then the most restrictive permission applies between the two, right? So if the share permission gives full control, but the NTFS permissions gives denied access, then they have no access. They're denied. right? When permissions are passed from parent to child, right? So basically, folders nested in folders inherit permissions from their parent folder. So the folder above them, unless you turn inheritance off, you can turn that off. And when you move or copy an object to a folder, the object takes on permissions of the folder. Right, unless it's on the same folder, there's the same volume, right? So if it's on the same volume, it retains its permissions from the original folder. All right, GP results. To pull up a list of groups a user belongs to. Right, and then you could use the GP results /scope user username /r. So if you want to retrieve information on a user that's not signed in, right? GP results will give you the results for the person signed in. So CMD GP result /r. So here it runs all mine, right? I'm in the administrators groups, all these groups, right? So you can see, R is the resulting security policies. So basically, it shows everything. So I've got the local group policy. There's nothing being applied. I don't have Active Directory, so if I had Active Directory, you would see that information, but that's just GP results. And then once again, you'd use the second line down here with the username to get the results for a different user. All right. We went over sharing, so I'm going to skip this. Mapping a network drive, it's very easy. So go in here, right click on this PC and then map a network drive. Choose the drive letter that you want, and then you put in, as it says, whack whack the server, right? Whatever the server or its IP, right? You put in the server name and then its share name. If you have it, you can browse, right? Right, so I don't have anything shared. I do have a Dropbox, so I can do a Dropbox, right? So this is whack whack, the machine name, right, which is this machine, and Dropbox, and so I can share it so that I can access that with a drive letter, right? So I can, let's just see, do I have D? No, I don't. So I finished. So now I've got a Z drive, right? So if I go to command prompt, I can go to the Z drive, right, which is my Dropbox folder. So now I can access my Dropbox folder by a drive letter because I mapped a network drive to it. All right. Right, so Sync Center allows two computers to sync the contents of a shared folder or volume to keep them in sync, right? Manage offline files, enable offline files, right? So this is a good way to ensure the files stay in sync, so that, especially if you have a laptop, and you got a network share, and so you take the files home, you make changes to them, and then you get back to the office, you plug it in, and then it resyncs, and it syncs the files back to the share. Oops. Now let's just do control panel. Sync center. Right, so manage offline files. You're gonna have to enable it, and then you want to sync the offline files, right? So enabled. So now I go to sync center, right? Set up these sync partnerships, right? Right. Sync results, manage offline files, view offline files, map network drives. So I don't have anything. You need to have a server and that. So I'm just going to disable that. So the options, options aren't available because I don't have that network set up for that. And this is showing that, right? So you can always sync. You right click on the file folder, and you can sync it. Now, to protect data, they're saying that you should probably disable file and printer sharing. You can hide a shared file, right? If you want to share a folder but don't want it visible, you add the $ to the end of the folder name. Those that want to access the hidden folder must enter the complete path to the folder, including the $ in the search box. So, so that's how you hide a folder and make it a hidden share. So here's an example. Share this folder, the share name, and you put personnel, $, and so then the share becomes personnel, $, so it's hidden, right? So I could do that with my Dropbox folder here, right? Properties, sharing, right? Share. Now, all right, so we'll just do new folder, hidden, right click, property sharing, advanced sharing, share this folder, hidden, $, and then we're going to apply and close. So now that's a hidden share. So if I do whack TCC, I can see my Dropbox, my share, and users, but I do not see hidden, right? So I can go to Dropbox, and it goes to my Dropbox. But I can also go to hidden, $, and it goes to my hidden because it's hidden. So that's a hidden drive. All right. Right. So there's two types of admin shares by default, right? Any volume or drive, and then also the system root folder. Um, so you can do percent system root percent, right? And it goes right to the C Windows drive, right? But I could also go TCC, right? So these are my shares, but by default, I have a $C share. Um, that's the admin share. It's a hidden share, right? But every drive, so even my Z drive should have a share. Should, but nope. All right, so it doesn't because of the way it's set up. Because it's not a volume. It's not a volume. But I can do my D drive, but there's nothing in it. All right. Now these are still not volumes. Yeah. So if I had another drive, that would work. I can't add a drive, or I would. Right. So admin, right. Now, Active Directory, as I alluded to, is extremely powerful and very advantageous to have for corporations when you are administering large amounts of Windows servers or workstations. And it allows you to manage almost anything you can imagine. And it has 5 groups of services, right? The domain itself, certificates, you can manage your certificates. Federation services allows you to interact with other Active Directory domains and get access. Rights management, so digital rights management, being able to control the rights on digital data. And then the lightweight directory services, LDAP, that is useful for a lot of the authentications and authentications. So AD or Active Directory, overall it starts off as a forest, and you can have several, so the entire enterprise is under a forest usually, and then you have domains individually underneath the forest, so you could have an agent's domain and a corporate domain, or all kinds of different ways to break it up. HR, accounting could have their own domains, and then in the domains you have organizational units. Just make it easier to group certain things, so you can have. So in a lot of, say you had a corporate domain, but then you could have HR, accounting, IT, all in different organizational units underneath the domain, and just easy to group them because you can assign different group policies to different organizational units. And these are called group policy objects. And we saw how powerful group policy can be. You can manage all kinds of settings for those groups of users or devices that are in that organization unit. And here's just a graphical view of that, right? So you have the forest, you have the domain. So this could be corporate domain, and this could be the corporate site. This could be a remote site, and then within that corporate site, you have organizational unit, and then it contains user groups. It contains devices, contains users in the groups, and then, like I said, you can use federation services to talk between forests, right? A whole nother organization. So maybe you could trust and allow contractors and things like that with their organization to come in and do things through federation services. Or maybe you're using cloud services from a vendor, and they have resources over in their forest, and so they trust your users, and you have to use the federation services so that you can gain access to the services from the cloud vendor. And this just shows, right, so you have group policy that can be applied to an organizational unit, and then the users and groups within that unit would get NTFS and share permissions, and then that would dictate what they'd have access to. So it's all of this, right, where they're located in the domain, what group policies are applied to them, what groups they're in, what NTFS and share permissions are applied to. All that gets factored into what they have access to. So, right, 3 methods to access a domain controller, which domain controller basically houses the Active Directory, and it makes all the updates, and it's the controller for the domain. It controls what can and can't happen on the domain. You can actually sit at the server or the computer, just like you would any other computer, and access it that way. You can remote access to the server using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, or you can use the AD Administrative Center and PowerShell to administer it. So using scripts, things like that, programming to administer it. So there's actually 4 methods, but but that's okay. So because it's the AD Administrative Center, and then the 4th way is PowerShell. They are different. Right, you can use Server Manager and create a new user. Require a password, make it complex. Should not check the password never expires, because you should be expiring them every 90 days or whatever set by your company. And you can select and disable an account. So you might create the account in advance of somebody starting and just leave it checked as disabled, and then uncheck it on their start date so that they're ready. So it's an easy setup process. All right. So you can reset passwords. Active Directory just makes it really easy. I wish I could show you this. And this is just the properties of a user in Active Directory. You got login hours, and log on to, so you can restrict what devices they log on to, when they can log on to it. You can make them change the password the next time they log in. You can make it so they can't change the password. You can set it to the password never expires, right? And store the password using reversible encryption. That's very insecure. So some of these options you never want to do. The unlock account. So if you have your group policy set to 5 bad login attempts, this will get checked when the 5th bad attempt is made, and this will get checked, and then they unlock the account, right? you can unlock the account for them, so they can call in to the help desk and validate who they are and get the account unlocked. And there's all kinds of options in Active Directory, remote control, member of, what groups they're a member of, do they have dial-in privileges, the profile's got all kinds of information on them, their telephone numbers, right? So this could go and populate link and all kinds of other applications. All this information can be used by Windows Active Directory aware applications. Right, so it's got login restrictions, timeout screen locks, a home folder, right? So you can have the folder redirection. So you can, like the H drive, everybody has an H drive. At the school, this is their home folder option, and so this is setting up a network share and telling it where it's located for the user, and so it automatically creates it for you when you log in. And then we can assign group policies and manage all kinds of security settings from within Active Directory group policy. And this is just showing the group policy management for domain, right? So it's a little different than the local group policy because now we have domain computers, domain controllers, domain servers, domain users. So these are all the security options that you could apply. So like under domain computers, you can set security for every computer that's in your domain. Every computer will get the settings that you apply under this folder. Any servers, domain servers, there's security settings so that automatically certain settings, security settings are automatically applied to every server in the domain. And then domain users, right? You can set different policies for certain groups of users, and they all get these policies, that are within that. So it makes it very easy to put in the base security on people in the domain. So policies get applied local first, so your local group policies get applied first, then any site group policies get applied, then any domain policies get applied, then any OU policies get applied, and then any mandatory or enforced group policies are applied last. And the last policy to make a security setting change wins. So say in your local security policy, you say 5 bad attempts and the account gets locked out. But in the domain level policy, you set it to 3, right? And you don't set it in any of the others, then it's 3 bad attempts, not 5. But then say you come around later and you put 8 bad logins on the OU. Now it's 8 because it overwrites the domain. The domain overwrites the local, and then the OU overwrites the domain. But if they don't, then it's so if local is set at 5 and none of these change it, then it's 5. So it's whatever the last policy that applied that change to the security wins, and it goes in these orders, right? Local, then site, then domain, then OU, and then enforced is always applied. So this, if it's marked enforced, if it's an enforced group policy, it always gets applied. And this is just showing, right, here's a local policy that goes all the way through because none of the sites, domains, or OU or enforced changed it, so it's local. The site made a setting change, but then the domain overrode it, Here is the local policy made a change, then the site overrode it. And here is the local policy was made, but then the OU changed it, and then the enforced changed it. And then so we can use the resulting set of policy, or RSOP, to figure out what policy wins, right? And see our resulting set. Right. Right. So GP result / V will give us a currently applied policies, right? So CMD GP result / V. Right. So wow, yeah. So it's saying the resulting, right? I don't have any policies being applied, but it shows me all of that could be, right? So it tells me about my workstation, tells me about settings. The group policy was never applied because I don't have group policy, I just have local group policy. So my group policy settings are not applicable. My local group policy, I don't have anything set, but so they weren't applied. Here's my groups, and then once again, for software installations, log on scripts, log off. Here's my user policies, which I don't have any set. Right, so RSOP, my resulting set of policies. I just ran that, and so it's going to run through all this. And then it pulls up. Here is everything, right? And I don't have anything, right? But this is the result, right? So it's not defined. Everything is not defined, right? But I can go through here, and if anything was set, I could see what one won, right? So this would show me after the local, the site, the domain, the OU, and the enforced were applied. This is my resulting policies, and mine's all undefined right now. Alright, and this is just showing it, and that is our chapter 16 on security and sharing files and folders.